Hi, you're with Julian on the Brown Note, returning after a hiatus in which I lost my house, my car, and my job, and then got my car back and a new house and a new job. So it's been a busy 6 weeks for me, and I haven't done anything on the radio. And coincidentally, my first show back on air is my end of year lists, which is my most fun time of the year. So even though it's late, I normally like to wrap up this whole endeavour, which is albums of the year, movies of the year, and then finally tracks of the year. I normally wrap this whole thing up before Christmas, but it's going to be a joy that Jesus would have loved to have been spread through the whole Christmas period. So the albums today, and what a year for albums, absolutely superb. I'm limiting it to 20, so I can actually play tracks this time instead of rushing through, but all of them are great. Movies, there's a few prominent releases that I haven't seen yet and will go over Christmas, hopefully before the next show, but overall it's been a disastrous year, I think. Absolute crap. Tracks of the year will just be like a track off of all of the albums of the year. So today is my top 20 albums of a brilliant year, 2025. And this will make it to YouTube, as will the movies, but the tracks probably not. So kicking us off at number 20, Bad Bunny, who is Taylor Swift level global pop superstar and performative outrage for MAGA in America for some reason. They didn't even know that they hated him until he was announced as a halftime Super Bowl. But in between, he is one of the highest streamed artists of the last 10 years and frequently goes to number one in America with Spanish language albums. The first, I think, to have done so. And his new one, Debris Tira Mass Photos, or I Should Have Taken Mass Photos, which became emblematic of the Palestinian cause earlier in the year on release, very early, I think January release. Probably his most complete album. I think I've actually reviewed the last few albums by him and featured them on my show. And in general, I feel like they're good, but he does that thing like Drake does, which is, I'm going to put 25 tracks on an album, and it always seems a bit overstuffed, and I would say the same about this, but probably the most cohesive of his albums. So from my number 20, Debris Tira Más Fotos, Café y Con Rion. So number 20 in our festive 50. It's not a festive 50. It's a top 20, which I do every year. Sometimes it's a top 30, but this year everything is ridiculously strong album-wise. And that was Bad Bunny at number 20 with Debris, Tira Más Photos, I Should Have Taken More Photos, and Café Con Ron. At 19, the most annoying album of the year is Bon Iver. So Justin Vernon came into the scene in the first decade of the century with For Emma, Forever Ago and the self-titled follow-up. Two of the finest singer-songwriter albums of the era and game-changing. And then decided to become more experimental for about 10 years and came back with a much more singer-songwriter album called Sable Fable. And that was about March, I think it came out. But the really annoying thing about this album is, if he'd released the whole thing in one chunk, everyone would have regarded it as a classic. But he took 4 of the tracks and released them in November last year as an EP. And then when the album came out, you got the 4 tracks on one disc and the rest of the tracks on another. I don't know why they did that. It was a really good collection of songs, though. So at number 19 from Sable Fable, which I have put together myself as one album and not a stupid mix of EP and album. Things Behind Things Behind Things, classic Justin Vernon songwriting from Sable Fable at number 19. And that really is Justin Vernon at his For Emma, Forever Ago best, songwriting-wise. Things Behind Things was one of the tracks that did come out a year ago on the EP, but from an excellent album, Sable Fable, Slept On, Taken for Granted at 19 on my list. At number 18, UK electronic music savant Jamie Roberts, better known as Blawan, named after Javanese coffee, no less. He really did come to prominence without albums. Why They Hide Their Bodies Under My Garage, one of the biggest, grimiest dance tunes of the century so far. And only released an album in 2018, and this is a follow-up called Sick Elixir, Great year for electronic music. I've got at least 3 really prominent electronic albums in my list, and this is one of them. It's also very punishing. It is a very avant-garde, noisy album, and won't appeal to many people. But at number 18, Sick Elixir, and from that, Nos. That's gnarly stuff from Blawan. At number 18, with Sick Elixir, a very punishing avant-garde industrial electronic album. At number 17, another slept-on album in my top 20 albums of 2025, Black Country New Road. So when I started putting my music stuff on YouTube, that was the first review, was Ants from Up There by Black Country New Road, which for a few years was my only new release album that I gave 10 out of 10 to, until last year's winner of my best album and best track of the year, Godspeed You Black Emperor, with No Title, got the same score. That year I had a joint number 1, and this year I've got a joint number 1. So that's the only 2 years, I think, that since I've been doing this show, that I've had joint number 1s. But that year it was Moto Mami by Rosalia, who is back this year, and also Black Country New Road, previous winners of my joint number 1 album of the year. They went through an incredible journey. So they started out as one of the stalwarts of this incredible new British indie music scene, which included bands like Black Midi and Squid, who are also on the list, and Dry Cleaning and Wet Leg, who are rubbish. Great branding, but the music's shite. So Black Country New Road had reached its pinnacle with Ants from Up There, one of the most emotive indie rock records of the century, rightly compared to Arcade Fire's Funeral from nearly 20 years previously, with that amount of outpouring of emotion on their music, and I was blown away by it. Since then, within days of that album coming out, their incredibly iconic lead singer, who was very noted for his warbling singing and incredibly deep lyrics, quit through mental health reasons, and I believe was working in a cake shop at the moment. So the band regrouped, and they did a bit of a Joy Division New Order thing, which was they stopped playing their old music and started making new music. And we got the excellent live album, which came out a couple of years after Ants from Up There, which showcased all new material, but particularly moved away from that lone wolf vocalist and lyricist to utilising, I think, 4 vocalists, one of them male who doesn't seem to sing at all on this album, and 3 women who do sing across the album, and one of them is from Jockstrap, the band, the duo Jockstrap. And I saw them live at the Sydney Opera House as well about a year ago, and it was a very different Black Country New Road. This one was, I called them the Harry Potter house band, but it's like a lot of posh girls playing cellos and trumpets and stuff, and singing these incredibly long-form songs. I wish I'd chosen longer songs on the show today, because I'm going to get through it so quickly. Like Moonlight Shadow, if you remember that song, like Dick Turpin on the Highway sort of stuff. And they've developed into this entirely new band, and their first studio album, Forever How Long, was another slept-on album. It was a really good album, and it in its mainstay, it had these like 5-6 minute mini operas where they were telling stories about a woman in the night meeting someone at a bar and riding through the wilderness and stuff like that. And I thought it was terrific. So at 17, from Black Country New Road's Forever How Long, this is Salem Sisters. Number 17, that's Black Country New Road. Previous winners of this list, my top 20 albums of 2025, a stellar year for albums for me. And that was Forever How Long, their first studio album after the departure of their lead singer several years ago. And at 16, their compatriots in the new wave of British indie, Squid, who are another massively slept-on band. They came through with Bright Green Field in 2021, which made my albums of the year. And alongside, they were probably closest related to Black Midi, who are sadly no longer with us. Their lead singer is now solo. I don't know why they broke up. Oh Monolith that came out in 2023, I think is their masterpiece. That was in my top 10 albums of the year. And all the way back in February, they released Cowards, which was slept on. It's just such a good album. And again, it's sort of developing their style. I think this is probably up there with their most easy to get into. I think with Black Midi and with Squid, they can be quite challenging musically. But this one was probably a bit easier to digest. And I thought it was fantastic. So Squid at number 16 with the album Cowards, and this is Building 650. Squid at 16 with Cowards, and followed by a fellow Brit they have something in common with. So the cutest girl in pop is Victoria Beverly Walker, who is known as Pink Pantheress, and I have, like Squid, featured all 3 albums that she's released in my top albums of the year. So To Hell With It, which was a mixtape in 2021, Heaven Knows, which was a full-length studio, and Fancy That, this year's album and her most prominent release so far, Good. I would take Pink Pantheress every single day over Sabrina Carpenter or Addison Rae. Her music wipes the floor with this mid-tier dross pop from female solo pop and R&B stars that just keeps getting... Why is Addison Rae in people's albums of the year? It's rubbish, but we elevate it to being this critical thing, like we used to do with Beyonce, making out that it's one of the albums of the year, and FKA Twigs, but that's a different story. But I've loved everything that Pink Pantheress has done, and she has got the most gorgeous faux posh English accent, and looks great as well. She did complain that she didn't have the looks for a star at one point, which is like... Well, when she came out with To Hell With It in 2021, we didn't even know her name. So she was a Burial-esque anonymous artist, but seems to be wearing it very well now. From Pink Pantheress at 15, her third in a row, like Squid, in my albums of the year, from Fancy That, which is a mixtape again, rather than a studio album. This is Girl Like Me. Judicious use of one of the best pop songs of the century, Romeo by Basement Jaxx. That's Pink Pantheress at number 15 with Fancy That, her most prominent release yet. Hasn't put a foot wrong in any direction, and that's from Fancy That, that's Girl Like Me. At number 14, the first rap album in the list in what was a very strong year for full-length rap albums, I thought, particularly if you're an old head. I don't know much about Destined Choice Root, who is either JID or JID, but the album he put out, God Does Like Ugly, was one of the high points of the year and didn't appear in anyone's end-of-year lists, which is very, very strange for me. I'm not quite sure. He's released quite a lot as far as I know. All the way back to 2017, 4 studio albums and then collaborative albums. So God Does Ugly was a really engaging and imaginative ride and easy to digest. Not like Billy Woods is going to appear later in the list with a much more challenging art house sort of take on rap. And this was still from the underground of rap, I guess, a bit. But it was very easy to listen to, and I thought it was fantastic. So at number 14, the first rap album in the list, God Does Like Ugly from JID, and the track will contain swearing, I imagine, Glory. It's JID or JID, I don't even know, from... So, an album that was missed off a lot of... I haven't even looked at a lot of the lists, to be honest, of albums of the year this year. I don't care anymore. Music criticism is at an all-time low, and all it cares about is female solo pop and R&B artists. It's just garbage at the moment. That's JID and God Does Ugly at number 14. And thank God we're getting into some longer songs, because this would have been a very short show. It still might be. At number 13, Dark Side. So Nicholas Jar, he's in the running for greatest electronic music artist of the century. He's done a lot of really great stuff. He's done stuff under his own name, Nicholas Jar. He's done stuff as the duo with Dave Harrington, the guitarist, as Dark Side. And Against All Logic, his more club-based music as well. They've all got at least 2 great albums under each one of them. And that's in the last 10 15 years. Darkside came on the scene with a really great idea, which was electronic music for people that like Dark Side of the Moon, which is obviously where Darkside came from with Psychic. But Spiral was fantastic. And the album Nothing that came out this year was kind of a given. I thought it was one of their most interesting releases, and it didn't really get that much attention. I think it should have. Another slept-on album. So from Nothing, and thank God for the song's length, SNC from my number 13 album of the year by Darkside. Maybe I'm just old, or like all the albums I like, half of them have been ignored this year. That's Darkside, the Nicholas Jarre, Dave Harrington, I think, and now a drummer as well. So they're a three-piece now from Darkside, and a credible live act as well. I've seen Nicholas Jarre solo live, and that was pretty mind-blowing. At number 12, I think, the only artist in the list with 2 entries. So normally every album that I feature in my albums of the year list, I've either featured on the show pretty much 100% of the time, and most of the time they're reviewed online as well. So I do a YouTube, the Brown Note review on YouTube. But because I was out of action for a couple of months due to personal crises, that Morrissey was so right when he said I was looking for a job and then I found a job, and heaven knows I'm miserable now. Truer words were not spoken. But a lot of these albums are ones that I sort of swept up towards the end of the year, but wasn't doing the radio show regular, and wasn't doing reviews and so on. And I got the album by Cameron Winter called Heavy Metal, and I got the album called Getting Killed by Geese, and I did say in my head over and over, the vocals are very similar on these 2 records. Well, Cameron Winter is in fact the vocalist for Geese. I just don't know anything. I'm just not up to date on anything. So anyway, Geese broke through, and we'll come to them later this year with, I think, their 3rd album. But Cameron Winter released a solo album, which is superb, called Heavy Metal. And that has been featuring in a lot of albums of the year lists. A really good singer-songwriter album. It's got its own vibe. It's not really comparable to the Geese album, I don't think, in any way. So it's a fantastic album. At number 12, Heavy Metal from Cameron Winter, and this Can't Keep Anything. Great lyrics, great singing, warbling, and very strong melodies, and nothing like the Geese album at all. That's the lead singer of Geese, Cameron Winter, who had nearly as much acclaim for his own debut solo album as he did for his band's album, which we will get to. Dijon Duenas had a very big year for his 2nd album, I think. So released Absolutely in 2021 and Baby in 2025. A mixture of Prince and Jai Paul and, for some reason, D'Angelo, with really interesting sound stages. He's worked as a producer with very big artists, but this was very much a breakthrough album for him. And from Baby, at my number 11 album, I'm nearly at the halfway stage, and time-wise, close enough, I think. I was worried that this 2-hour radio show would actually be over in an hour, so we're doing all right. At number 11, ending the first half of the show, is Dijon and Baby, and this track, Higher. With Julian on the Brown Notes, counting down my albums of 2025. Next week, which probably will be after Christmas Day, actually, will be my films of the year, in a terrible year for films. Well, not really, but not much. And then my tracks of the year probably will be just after New Year's Eve, which is late, but I did have other stuff going on this year. At number 10, another rap album, but a much more experimental and challenging one, which and a rapper that I've slept on so bad, Billy Woods, who's been releasing music or making music since around the start of the century. And I have featured a couple of Arm & Hammer albums on this show in my albums of the year without realising his vast solo discography and collaborative discography. The album Gollywog was an absolute high point of, I thought, a really good, strong year for some deeper rap albums. Very sort of statement of my life and my upbringing and everything about me. Some challenging stuff on there, stuff about domestic violence, and really good lyrics, really avant-garde production. Reminded me a bit of Danny Brown, sort of when he goes experimental. Superb album at number 10, kicking off the top 10. And from Gollywog, the track Star 87. I've always wondered if that track was related to the movie Star 80, because it's called Star 87. Star 80 was about I think a beauty queen turned model who was murdered by her possessive husband manager in the start of the 80s, which was quite a prominent film. And given the nightmarish quality of that track, it probably possibly is. So that kicked off the top 10 in my albums of the year. Billy Wood's Gollywog at 10. And in a great year for electronic releases, at number 9, it's DJ Rum and Under Tangled Silence. Probably the classiest electronic release of the year. Felix Manuel. It says born in London, but I assume with maybe Portuguese heritage, I'm not really sure, but it has released 3 albums, 7 Lives in 2013, Portrait with Firewood in 2018, most prominent release, Under the Tangled Silence, that featured in a lot of best albums of the year list, and rightly so, and also made virtuistic use of his piano playing, which is obviously a very, very good piano player, merging that with beat-based music. So from DJ Rum at number 9, Under Tangled Silence, and this is L'Ancienne. Actually, I think I said there were 3 electronic albums. I think there's 5. So a great year for electronic music, and none classier than DJ Rum at number 9 with Under Tangled Silence, and that was L'Ancienne. At number 8, the, I think, pivotal experimental indie album of the year, Yahweh Nailgun, or YHWH Nailgun, from Philadelphia and 45 Pounds. They had an incredibly unique take on music. Most of their songs were all 2 minutes, if that, long, and based around this incredible drummer who had this incredibly, I can't remember the terminology for it, but played notes on drums as well as just being a percussive tool. From that 45 Pounds album at number 8, this is Iron Feet. That was Yahweh Nailgun at number 8 in my albums of the year, with their debut 45 Pounds, one of the most interesting soundscapes of the year. At number 7, another electronic album. Is that well, it depends what you call the other remaining electronic album. I'm not sure electronic really covers that one. Daniel Lopatin from Massachusetts in America, up there with Nicholas Jar as one of the most important electronic music acts of the century, releasing dozens of albums since 2007. I've featured many on my show, particularly stuff like Replica, R+7, Garden of Delete, and so on. And he's done soundtrack work as well with the films like Uncut Gems and the recent one, Marty Supreme. All over the shop. And very interesting sort of avant-garde, abstract take on electronic music that fits in with the sort of electronic soundscapes of a lot of soundtrack work that's been done over the last 10, 15 years. I thought his recent album called Tranquilizer might be his best. And he always releases good music, but I think this might be his most engaging album, most commercial, even though it's not particularly commercial, but most outgoing, most referencing other music, other electronic music. I thought it was superb. So at number 7, One O Tricks Point Never and Tranquilizer, and this track, Modern Lust. That's One O Tricks Point Never, also known as Daniel Lopatin. And the album Tranquilizer, very prolific artist and one of the most prominent electronic music producers and soundtrack artists of the last 20 years. And that was Tranquilizer at 7. At 6, well, we had Cameron Winter's solo album at 12 called Heavy Metal. And I, like virtually everyone, didn't really know the band Geese. They're on their album number 4. He's the lead singer of Geese, so he's the only person I think in the list with 2 albums. And number 6, Geese Getting Killed, Probably the most acclaimed rock album of the year, I think. Although his own solo album wasn't too far off. I'm not 100% sure on the experimental angle. I find their music really quite engaging and easy to digest. Very, very post Radiohead and The Smile, and even stuff like Car Seat Headrest seems to reference a lot of other music, like relatively short song structures. Certainly not like something like the first Squid album or anything like that. It's really, I thought it was quite easy to listen to, but a fantastic album as well. The title track from the album by Geese, their fourth at number 6, Getting Killed. Geese at number 6 in my albums of the year. Next week I'll do my movies and then my tracks of the year like I do every year. Just a slight delay this time around. And that was Geese Getting Killed, their fourth album at number 6. At number 5, into the top 5, so I will be playing some extra music after the end of the list, because normally I'm rushing through 1 minute snips of the last 10 songs because I've just packed the show with too much, but keeping it to a top 20 and only choosing quite short tracks has meant that I'm in the top 5 with quite a long way to go in the show. Rosalia, whose full name is Rosalia Villa Tobella from Catalonia in Spain, is the Bjork of the modern era. She is a generational talent, a generational singer, incredible voice and incredible artistry as well. Each album seems to be a completely different vibe. Very much an album-based artist when it comes to album releases, not caring at all about prevailing trends in pop music in any way. Shamefully, I've not got her debut Los Angeles from 2017, but El Mal Quiera in 2018 made my list of albums of the year. I love that album. Very unique sort of take on modern electronic production and traditional Spanish singing. Then followed that with Motomami in 2022, which was my joint album of the year with Black Country, New Roads, Ants from Up There. So she's got a good track record on this show for albums of the year. And Lux, I'm only just sort of coming to terms with it, but it is a masterpiece. And this time she's gone for an incredible suite of orchestral music that's not like anything else that anyone else is doing. A true generational talent. So at number 5 from Rosalia's Lux album, and this track La Perla. She is a generational talent. She's just phenomenal. Rosalia at number 5, kicking off my top 5 albums of the year with the album Lux and her orchestral journey. It's an amazing journey of an album. And that was La Perla from Lux at 5 by Rosalia. At number 4, one of my all-time favourite bands. In fact, I sort of go backwards and forwards from thinking the greatest rock band in the world is either this band, Swans, or Godspeed You Black Emperor. And based on their last 2 albums, as a line ball call, Michael Gira, who has been the sole member of Swans over their near 40 years, 45 years, of 17 studio albums and probably another 17 collections and live albums on top of that. I listen to them very frequently. They started as a no-wave, brutalist art rock project in the early 80s, making this incredible absolute noise din of the most punishing music. And they are the loudest band I've ever seen. So they have a reputation for their intensity and volume live, which outdoes even Godspeed You Black Emperor. And I can confirm that, having seen them in Sydney a few years ago. Quit for 10 years at the end of the 90s, and then came back with a raft of 2-hour albums in the 2010s, which the high points were Glowing Man, To Be Kind, and The Seer, absolute masterpieces. Then decided to give up on doing that whole really punishing 2-hour album thing for a couple of albums which were lesser but still better than just about anyone, and then suddenly came back with another 2-hour bombast with Birthing, which is another of the slept on albums of the year, one of the best rock albums. Is it the highest rock album? No, it's not the highest rock album for me, but I think Birthing in a way it's a continuation of the To Be Kind era, but it's also their most, I think, accessible album, if you can call a 2-hour album accessible. It's a very good My First Swans album, I feel. I think you get a good picture of who they are. And I just thought it was brilliant. So at number 4, Swan's 17th album, Birthing, which no one seemed to realise the majesty of. And from that, one of the only tracks under 15 minutes long, called Red Yellow. Swans at number 4 with Birthing, a 2-hour-long album, which is very, very common for them. Michael Gira has said that he won't make music that big anymore, and he's going to. I think he's in his 70s. I think he's just finishing a tour where he said he's putting to bed this gargantuan version of Swans, but he said that a few years ago as well. So who knows if we'll get some low-key country music from him or what he'll do going forward. But I thought it was an outstanding album. One of the stories of the year at number 3. I Am Eclipse, tragic. So the brothers Gene Malice Thornton and Terence Pusha T Thornton, they emerged as one of the few high points of rap music in the first sort of 5 or 6 years of the century, with Lord Willing, Hell Have No Fury, We Got It For Cheap, mixtape series. They were an incredible act. And Hell Have No Fury, I've put a review online giving it 10 out of 10 and calling it the rap album of the century so far. Pusha T went on after their mediocre commercial grab Till the Casket Drops in 2009. Pusha T became a solo act. Did some solo work for many years, working with Kanye West. He was the boss of Kanye West's record label, or something like that. And then released, after a couple of very long and decent but not groundbreaking albums, released Daytona, which was an incredible sub-half-hour album, and followed that up as well with Wet Will Always Dry, something like that, which was another great album. And then at the end of it, the standout performance on the album was his brother Malice, who disappeared off into Christianity after the band broke up. Lots of talk about the fact that their manager ended up they've got this niche. They rap about cocaine, and then they bend rapping about cocaine to comment on everything else that's happening in the world. He became like this full-blown born-again Christian, but he appeared at the end of that last Pusha T album with a standout performance. And any politician could gain from the rollout of the Clips album, Let God Sort 'Em Out, because it was just perfect in every way. The preceding singles were perfect. There's also a third member, which is Pharrell Williams. So they became synonymous with the production work of the Neptunes in their earlier incarnation. The Neptunes have broken up. Now it's just Pharrell Williams, and he's like the de facto third member, does all of the production. I love one producer albums for rap albums, and he does all of the production, which is often insanely good. It's a much different album to Clips from 16 years ago, because it's a much more sort of emotional album, as there's tracks about their parents dying and stuff like that. But it is sheer class. It's just the flow of the album is amazing. There's no dud note on it. The Needle Drop Guy gave it a 10 out of 10. I gave all my top 3 albums a 9.5 out of 10. I don't think I've done that in any previous year. I've listened to it so much that you can tell that it is a classic, because it just replays. Sooner or later you're going to get bored, but it just replays endless listening. Every track is really strong. They're never been like a big single band who have like 3 or 4 really massive tracks. It is just sheer class from start to finish. So from my third best album of the year by Clips, possible swearing, even though I think the previous times I've said that there wasn't any swearing on those raps, there probably will be this time. From Let God Sort 'Em Out at number 3, and this is Fico. Can't believe I've actually timed this quite well. So it's countdown time. If you were paying attention earlier, then you would have realised that I have, for the second time ever, a joint number 1. So at number 10, Billy Woods, outstanding. Everything in the top 10 is just outstanding. What a great year for albums. Gollywog at 10, DJ Rum, Undertangled Silence at 9. Yahweh Now Gun at 8 with £45. 10 Tricks Point Never at 7. with Tranquilizer, Getting Killed by Geese, the second Cameron Winter album in my top 20 albums of the year. At 5, Rosalia and Lux. At 4, Swans and Birthing. And that one with absolutely top tier lyrics, production and delivery. The return after 16 years of Clips with Let God Sort Them Out. At number 3. At number 1, the first number 1, and it's Deafheaven. So I have been a Deafheaven tragic, seen them multiple times when they've come to Australia. They emerged with what was called Black Gaze, not G-A-Y-S, but G-A-Z-E, which referred to the fact that they blended shoegaze music with death metal. Or black metal, and they became like a crossover event for genre music with Sunbather, an immortal album. I've loved all their albums. They came a New Bermuda, Ordinary Corrupt Human Love in 2018, and Infinite Granite in 2021. I feel by the time of Infinite Granite, people had got used to them and were taking them for granted, and they really had an unexpected rebirth with Lonely People with Power, which is definitely in the running with Sunbather as their best ever work. It felt more like Sunbather. Maybe if they had made Sunbather 10 years later, it would have been that album. It's an amazing work, and all year, if you've listened to this radio show, I would have said constantly that my album of the year goes backwards and forwards between these two, and in the end I just gave up trying to separate them. I think it's an absolute masterpiece, and one of my favourite album covers of all time. So at joint number 1, Deafheaven and Lonely People with Power. So for the first time since Moto Mami by Rosalia and Ants From Up There by Black Country New Road, both acts in my top 20 today, my album of the year is a joint number 1, and that one is the first number 1, Deafheaven, Lonely People with Power. I could have probably chosen a less abrasive track because a lot of it's actually quite tuneful, but that was Doberman from Deafheaven. So my other one is Lost to Thanica, and the self-titled Lost to Thanica debut album by siblings called Chukwuemeka Kondori and Joshua Crampton, who are siblings. They've both got incredibly long discographies I know next to nothing about, but the most my mind has been blown by an album in years. And like I said, I went backwards and forwards, which was the best album of the year. And in the end, I just couldn't choose between Deafheaven and Lost to Thanica. Very, very impressed. For once, Pitchfork magazine actually chose this as their album of the year, which is pretty mind-blowing. No female pop or R&B act at number 1 for a change. So the Lost to Thanica album from 2 veteran electronic music producers sounds like nothing else. I called it Cthulhu house music. There's a review of it online. And some people have said it's one of the only reviews of it on YouTube, which I find completely baffling. It's not on any streaming service. They didn't even master the album, which makes a lot of it incredibly loud and bleeding in noise. But it's as psychedelic as music gets. So from that, Kiwanasax, I don't know, I can't pronounce these names. I think they're Bolivian Americans. And I think actually The Queer People Medicines Are Here is the English of this track, which will play us out. I'll be back with my films of the year next week. I only just started recording that, so apologies if you've just been looking at a blank screen. But Lost to Thanica are my joint number 1 album with Deafheaven this year. And this track, The Queer People Medicines Are Here, will play us out. Adios.